She called security on the black man in seat 1A, demanded his bag be searched, and told the entire cabin she didn't feel safe sitting next to him. Marcus Osei sat perfectly still through all of it, ticket on the tray table, hands open, nothing to hide. What Sandra Whitfield didn't know was that the man she was trying to remove had spent 27 years making sure people like her could board planes like this one without ever thinking twice about it. To understand what happened when that cockpit door opened, we have to start 40 minutes earlier, before the engines ran, before the cabin doors closed, before a woman with a wet wipe and a loud voice decided that a man in a worn leather jacket didn't belong in the seat his ticket said was his. Marcus Osei had been in seat 1A for 11 minutes before anyone else boarded. First class. He had found the seat, without looking at the number twice, stowed his canvas bag under the seat in front of him before the flight attendant could offer to help, buckled his seatbelt, and asked for a glass of plain water. Not sparkling. Not with lemon. Just water. He opened a folded newspaper, laid it across his lap, and did not look around the cabin. He did not check his phone. He did not adjust anything unnecessarily. 27 years in the United States Army teaches you a particular relationship with space. You learn to occupy exactly as much of it as you need and no more. You learn that unnecessary movement draws attention and that attention in certain situations carries costs that other people do not have to calculate. Marcus Osei had been calculating those costs for most of his adult life. He had calculated them in forward operating bases in 3 countries. He had calculated them in VA waiting rooms and airport security lines and rental car counters in cities where no one knew his name or his rank or what he had done to earn the seat he was sitting in. He was 54 years old. He was tired of calculating, but he had not yet found a way to stop. He was retired now, Sergeant First Class, Honorable Discharge, 2019. He lived in a 2-bedroom house in College Park, outside Atlanta, with a vegetable garden in the back that his late wife had started and that he maintained because it was the one thing he could think of that she had touched every day and that he could still touch too. He was flying to visit his sister in Phoenix. He had a window seat request on file. They had given him 1A instead, an aisle, first class, an upgrade he had not asked for, and almost declined at the desk before the agent told him the flight was full in coach. He had nodded and taken the boarding pass. He sipped his water and read the paper. That was the position he was in, newspaper folded, water glass at his right, both feet flat on the floor, when Sandra Whitfield boarded. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now let's begin. I was in seat 2A. My name is Nia Carpenter. I am a civil rights attorney based in Atlanta, which means I have spent the better part of 8 years reading case files, deposition transcripts, and incident reports that describe exactly the kind of thing I was about to watch happen 12 inches in front of me at 30,000 feet. I want to be precise about that. I am telling you this story not because I handled it well. I am telling you this story because I did not, and because I think that matters more than the parts that went right. Sandra Whitfield came through the boarding door at 10:47 a.m. with a phone pressed to her ear and a voice calibrated to reach the back of whatever room she was in. Something about a closing date, a counterparty who was dragging their feet, a deadline that was, apparently, someone else's fault. She was around 43, light-colored suit, heels that struck the jetway floor with the particular rhythm of someone who had decided a long time ago that the sound of her own arrival was worth noting. Her hair was blonde and recently done. Her handbag was the kind that has a waiting list. She stopped when she reached row 1. She looked at her boarding pass. She looked at seat 1A. She looked at the man sitting in seat 1A, his worn brown leather jacket, his canvas bag under the seat. In front of him, his newspaper, his water glass, his face. She stood in the aisle, long enough that the 3 passengers behind her had to stop moving. One of them shifted her weight. Another looked at the ceiling. Sandra Whitfield sat down in seat 1B. She did not look at Marcus Osei. She put her handbag on the ottoman between the seats and pulled a wet wipe from her jacket pocket, the individual foil-wrapped kind, the kind you carry when you have decided in advance that the surfaces of the world are not clean enough for you. She wiped down her own armrest in 2 efficient strokes. Then she paused. Then she wiped the shared armrest between the 2 seats. She folded the wipe and placed it on her tray table with the deliberateness of someone making a point to a room that was not yet paying attention. Marcus Osei did not react. He turned a page of his newspaper. I saw all of it. I was close enough to hear the wipe against the armrest. I opened my own notebook. I had a brief to review, a hearing scheduled for the following week, and I told myself that what I had just seen was not necessarily what it looked like. I told myself there were other explanations. I wrote the date at the top of a blank page and underlined it. I did not look up again. That was the first time I chose not to do anything. Sandra Whitfield leaned toward the flight attendant standing near the forward galley. Her voice did not need to be raised. Could you double-check who is supposed to be in this section? The flight attendant, her name tag read Amara. She could not have been more than 26, leaned down with a handheld device, confirmed the seating, and kept her voice professionally neutral. The seating was correct. Sandra Whitfield gave a small smile without turning back toward Amara. Then your system has a problem. She turned to look at Marcus Osei's shoes. Canvas sneakers, worn at the heel. The kind that have been washed enough times that the original color has become approximate. She looked at his jacket. She looked at the canvas bag tucked under the seat in front of him. Then she looked at his hands on the newspaper. Then she looked away. She lifted her foot and nudged the canvas bag with the toe of her heel. Not hard. Just enough. The kind of gesture that is designed to be deniable. Marcus Osei leaned down, pulled the bag back close to his seat, and said nothing. He did not look at her. He turned another page. I looked up from my notebook. I looked at the bag on the floor. I looked at Sandra Whitfield's shoe. I looked at the back of Marcus Osei's head. I thought about the 7-page brief in my bag about a case involving a black man who had been removed from a hotel lobby for sitting in a chair that was available to anyone. I thought about the legal standard for discriminatory intent. I thought about 3 or 4 things I could say in the next 30 seconds that would change the temperature of this situation. I looked back down at my notebook. That was the second time I chose not to do anything. Sandra Whitfield took her phone from her jacket, pointed it towards seat 1A, and pressed the camera shutter. The sound was loud in the quiet cabin. A clean, sharp click. Marcus Osei looked up at the phone. He looked at it for a moment. The way you look at something you have seen before in different forms. Then he looked out the window. He placed his newspaper on the tray table, folded his hands on his lap, and said nothing. People around the cabin began to recalibrate. I could feel it without seeing it. The shift in posture, the tightening of attention, the specific quality of silence. That means everyone in a room has decided at the same moment to look somewhere else. Amara, the flight attendant, was looking at the floor. Her shoulders had dropped about an inch since she had first approached the row. I recognized the posture. I had seen it in young black women who worked in environments where the cost of intervening was higher than the cost of looking away. Sandra Whitfield called for the supervisor. When he arrived, she spoke quickly and clearly, her voice carrying the specific confidence of someone who has never experienced a room not responding to it. She did not feel safe, she said. She gestured towards seat 1A. She wanted it handled before the plane began to taxi. The supervisor asked to see the ticket. Marcus Osei reached into his jacket pocket with 2 fingers, slowly, visibly, both hands in view, and held the ticket out. The supervisor checked it. The seat was correct. The name matched. Everything was in order. Sandra Whitfield crossed her arms. He could be using someone else's ticket, she said. She wanted the bag checked. In the row behind me, I heard the sound of someone shifting in their seat. Hey, soft creak. No one said a word. I had my phone in my hand. I had the ACLU rapid response number in my contacts. I had been to 3 training seminars on bystander intervention in the past 2 years. I put my phone face down on the armrest. That was the 3rd time. I remember it more clearly than the other two. The supervisor made a call. 2 security officers came aboard, dark uniforms. ID badges, the particular posture of people who have been trained to read a room. Before they speak, they scan the cabin. They moved to row 1. The lead officer looked at Marcus Osei. He asked to see the ticket. Marcus Osei unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Not fast, not slow. He stood. The way someone stands, when they have stood like this before and know that the way they stand matters. Back straight, hands visible and open, nothing hidden, nothing sudden. He took the ticket from his jacket with 2 fingers and held it out. The officer checked it against his device. Returned it. The seat was correct. Sandra Whitfield said, "Check the bag." One of the officers glanced at his partner. A half-second of something passing between them. The other officer moved his hand slightly toward his belt, not drawing anything, just resting it there. Marcus Osei saw the movement. He paused. For 1 beat. He placed the ticket on the tray table. He lowered his hands to his sides and went completely still. The lead officer asked Marcus to step into the aisle. Marcus Osei stepped into the aisle. He stood between the rows with his back straight and his hands at his sides. He did not explain himself. He did not look at Sandra Whitfield. He stood in the position of a man who has learned, through long practice, that explanation in these moments rarely helps and sometimes makes things worse. Amara, the flight attendant, was standing near the forward galley. I could see her from where I sat. She was looking at the floor. Her shoulders were low. Her hands were folded in front of her. She was 26 years old, and she had no authority to change what was happening, and she knew it, and the knowing was visible in every line of her body. The security officer bent down and examined the canvas bag. He asked if there were sharp objects or liquids inside. Marcus Osei shook his head. The officer opened the bag. Inside, neatly folded clothes, a small worn notebook, an empty water bottle. Nothing else. The officer zipped the bag closed and placed it back where it had been. Sandra Whitfield said, "He still should not be here." The lead officer did not respond to her. He looked at his partner. Then he looked at Marcus Osei and said they needed to verify a few additional items and asked him to take his seat while they waited for clearance. Marcus Osei nodded. He sat down in seat 1A. He buckled his seatbelt. He placed both hands on his lap. He looked at the closed cockpit door. Sandra Whitfield leaned into the aisle. "I will not sit next to that man for 1 more minute," she said. Her voice was still steady, still carried. One of the officers walked to the cockpit door. He knocked once, soft and professional. He waited. The cabin had gone completely quiet. No silverware. No overhead bins opening. No one talking. I looked at the back of Marcus Osei's head. I looked at his hands on his lap. I looked at the ticket sitting on the tray table, where he had placed it so there would be no question about what he was reaching for. I thought about every document I had ever filed on behalf of someone who had done everything right and still ended up in a room trying to prove they belonged there. I did not stand up. The cockpit door opened. Captain James Caldwell stepped out, for stripes on his shoulder boards. Hat in his left hand. He was 51, broad-shouldered, the kind of bearing that comes from years of being responsible for the lives of everyone in a pressurized tube. At 35,000 feet, he stopped at the head of the cabin and scanned the space without speaking. The security officers, the supervisor, Sandra Whitfield standing in the aisle, and Marcus Osei sitting in seat 1A with his hands on his lap and his eyes on the middle distance. Caldwell walked slowly down the aisle. He stopped at row 1. He looked at the canvas bag under the seat. He looked at the ticket on the tray table. He looked at Sandra Whitfield. Then he looked at Marcus Osei, and he looked at him for a moment longer than he had looked at anything else, the particular look of a person placing a face into the correct context inside a very large memory. Marcus Osei looked up. Their eyes met. No greeting passed between them. No nod. Just recognition, quiet and mutual, the kind that does not need to be performed for anyone else. Sandra Whitfield lifted her chin. "I want him removed from this section," she said. "I have rights. I am a senior executive and a frequent flyer, and I am telling you clearly that I do not feel Caldwell held up one hand. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at her. While he held it up, he took his hat from his left hand and held it at his side. He stood up straight. He looked at Marcus Osei one more time. The distance between them had not changed. Then Captain James Caldwell raised his right hand. Straight, sharp, clean. A salute held with the precision of someone for whom this gesture has a specific meaning and is not performed lightly. He held it for a long beat. Then he lowered it. He said, in a voice just loud enough for the first two rows to hear, "Sergeant. First Class Marcus Osei." Marcus Osei looked at him. A slow breath. He gave one small nod, not a salute. Returned, just an acknowledgement between two people who understand what the other has carried. Somewhere behind me, a glass was set down on a tray table very carefully. I heard myself exhale. I had not known, until that moment, that I had stopped breathing. Sandra Whitfield said, "What is this? What is happening?" Caldwell turned to face her. His expression had not changed. "He is in his correct seat. I am a shareholder in this airline," she said. "I have filed complaints that have resulted in actual policy changes." "I have, ma'am." Caldwell's voice was the same volume it had been since he walked out of the cockpit. "You are interfering with the operation of this flight. You have two choices. You return to your seat and remain quiet, or you are reseated in another section of the aircraft." Sandra Whitfield looked around the cabin. There were phones held up at several tables, the same phones she had noted approvingly when she thought they were recording evidence that supported her position. She looked at the screens. She looked at the faces behind the screens. Something shifted in her expression. Not remorse, not yet, but the first arrival of information she had not been expecting to receive. "I will be filing a formal complaint," she said. Caldwell nodded. "You have that right." He turned to the lead security officer and spoke quietly. "The inspection is concluded. No violation. No grounds for further action." The security officers nodded. They stepped back. They walked to the front of the plane and were gone. The supervising flight attendant approached Sandra Whitfield and spoke to her in a low voice about an available seat in the main cabin. Sandra Whitfield picked up her handbag. She looked at Marcus Osei, at his hands on his lap, at the ticket on his tray table, at the canvas bag under the seat in front of him. She said nothing to him. She turned and walked toward the rear of the aircraft. The passengers in the aisle made way. No one said anything. The curtain between cabins closed behind her. The supervisor opened her tablet. She typed several lines, confirmed a seat. Reassignment, locked it. The name Sandra Whitfield was attached to a passenger. Flag in the system, disruptive behavior, incident documented, logged for review. She did not read this aloud. She did not need to. Caldwell turned back to Marcus Osei. He nodded once. Marcus Osei nodded back. Then Caldwell returned to the cockpit, and the door closed, and the cabin came back to itself slowly, the way a room does, after something real has happened in it. Amara brought Marcus Osei a fresh glass of water. She set it down without a word. She did not make eye contact. She did not need to make a speech. The glass of water, placed carefully on the tray table, without being asked, was the only apology she had the authority to make, and she made it. Marcus Osei looked at the glass. He looked at the closed cockpit door. He picked up his newspaper, folded it, and set it aside. He looked out the window as the plane began to taxi. He slept for most of the flight. When the aircraft reached cruising altitude, Captain Caldwell came out of the cockpit one more time. He stopped at seat 1A and leaned down. He spoke quietly, close enough that only the first two rows could have heard anything. "It's good to see you again," he said. Marcus Osei looked up at him. "Safe travels," he said. Caldwell straightened up and returned to the cockpit. I was still in seat 2A. I had my notebook open. The page I had dated at the beginning of the flight was still blank below the date. I looked at the blank space for a moment, and then I began to write. Not the brief I had planned to review. Something else. Something I was going to need to figure out how to say correctly before I tried to say it to anyone but myself. At the gate in Phoenix, passengers stood up row by row. No one pushed. Marcus Osei stood, pulled his canvas bag from under the seat, slung it over one shoulder. He stepped into the aisle. Captain Caldwell was standing at the cockpit door. He stood straight. He raised his right hand one more time, briefer than before, but no less precise. Marcus Osei paused for one beat. He nodded. He kept walking. I watched him until he disappeared through the aircraft door and into the jetway. I did not catch up to him. I did not know his name until I looked it up that evening. After the video that someone in row 4 had been recording was already circulating with a caption that read, "Pilot salutes black veteran after passenger. Called security on him." 3 million views by the time I landed and found a signal. The RAND Corporation published findings in 2021 documenting that 58% of black military veterans reported experiencing racial profiling within 12 months of leaving active service. Marcus Osei had been out for 5 years. Every time he reached into his pocket in a situation like the one that happened on that plane, he reached in slowly, with both hands visible. Every time, not because he was guilty of anything, because he had learned, through years of careful practice, that the way a black man moves in certain spaces is read differently than the way other men move, and that the cost of being misread can be permanent. He had served 27 years protecting a country that still, in the 5th year of his civilian life, required him to calculate how to open his own bag. I did not stand up on that plane. I did not say anything. I am a civil rights attorney. I have the language, the credentials, and the specific professional knowledge to have intervened at any of at least 3 moments when intervention might have changed how the next 20 minutes unfolded for Marcus Osei. I chose not to. I told myself I was not certain. I told myself I did not want to escalate. I told myself that someone else would. 3 months later, I published an essay in the Atlanta Tribune about those 3 choices and what I think they actually were. My editor did not change a word. Several colleagues told me it was brave to publish it. I told them that calling it brave was part of the problem. The airline issued a statement 48 hours after the video reached 2 million views. It cited a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior toward passengers. It did not mention Sandra Whitfield by name. Sandra Whitfield's frequent flyer account was suspended pending review. The outcome of that review was not made public. Amara, the flight attendant, who looked at the floor when Marcus Osei was asked to stand in the aisle, filed a written account with her union rep the following day. She described what she had seen and what she had not done and why. Her union rep told her this took courage. She said she was not sure what to do with that, because she had not done anything courageous. She had done nothing. She had just finally decided to stop pretending that nothing had happened. 6 months after the flight, Marcus Osei's sister posted a photograph on a private family account. It showed Marcus in the back garden of her house in Phoenix, standing next to a raised garden bed, holding a small pot of seedlings. He was looking at the camera with the expression of someone who has learned to locate the ordinary things and stay close to them. His sister wrote one sentence below the photo. He brought seeds from home, she wrote. He said Amara would have wanted to see what they grew into. It was the first time his late wife's name had appeared in any account of anything connected to that day. The garden, it turned out, was the part of the story nobody had filmed. Narrator reflection, I keep coming back to the third moment. Not the wet wipe, not the camera shutter, not the security officers walking down the aisle. The third moment, when Marcus Osei's ticket was on the tray table, and his bag had been searched and found to contain folded clothes and a notebook and an empty water bottle, and Sandra Whitfield still said he should not be there, and I had my phone in my hand with the right number already in my contacts, and I put it face down on the armrest. The RAND Corporation's 2021 findings on black veterans and racial profiling are worth reading, not because the statistics are surprising to anyone who has been paying attention, but because they are documented. They are on record. 58% within 12 months of leaving service. Men and women who spent years being trusted with weapons and decisions and the lives of the people next to them, and who came home to spaces where they were required to prove, with their hands visible and their movements slow and their voices careful, that they were not a threat. Marcus Osei had been calculating that cost since before I got on that plane. He was still calculating it when I got off. What I think about now is not what Sandra Whitfield did. It is what the rest of us did. The flight attendant who looked at the floor. The passengers who looked at their phones. The attorney in seat 2A who had the tools and the language and the professional obligation and decided that someone else would handle it. Someone else did not handle it. A pilot walked out of a cockpit and handled it. And I wrote an essay about my own silence 3 months later and called it accountability. I'm still not sure it was. Have you ever been in a room where you knew what was happening, knew what the right thing to do was, knew you had the ability to do it, and stayed in your seat? Anyway, not because you were afraid exactly, but because the cost of standing up felt real and the outcome of standing up felt uncertain? What did you tell yourself about that afterward? Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for reflective and entertainment purposes. The racial profiling of Black Americans in public spaces and the specific experiences of Black military veterans in civilian life reflect documented patterns. The RAND Corporation's 2021 report on veteran experiences with racial discrimination is publicly available at RAND.org. The American Civil Liberties Union maintains resources on racial profiling and civil rights at ACLU.org. If you or someone you know has experienced discrimination in a public accommodation, the ACLU's Know Your Rights resources at ACLU.org/Know Your Rights provide specific, accessible guidance on available legal protections.